My name is Harlon, and 2 years ago, my own daughter handed me a $10 bill and told me to leave the house I had built with my bare hands. That night, I walked away with nothing but humiliation and a pocketful of crumpled bills, thinking my life was finished. But what they didn't know was that those $10 would become the spark that rebuilt my entire world. Today, I stand in a place they never imagined I could reach, and soon they will face the consequences of every cruel word and every lie. Before I tell you how my story unfolded, I want to know, where are you watching from and how old are you? Please subscribe to Revenge Untold to hear more stories that will stay with you long after they end. 2 years ago, I stood in the doorway of the home I had worked my entire life to provide, and my daughter Tatum pressed a $10 bill into my hand like it was a bus ticket out of her life. The words still echo in my head. "You don't belong here anymore." It wasn't shouted in anger, it was spoken with the cold finality of a judge handing down a sentence. My wife Lorna sat on the couch beside a man named Grady, her hand resting comfortably in his, as if I had already been erased. No warning. No explanation. 28 years of marriage dismissed in a tone she might have used to decline a telemarketer's call. I looked at my daughter, waiting for some flicker of hesitation, some sign that the little girl who once held my hand on Sunday mornings still lived inside her. But what stared back at me wasn't love or regret, it was calculation. She didn't see a father anymore. She saw a failure, a man to be discarded, so her mother's new life could begin without obstacles. The insult wasn't in the eviction itself, though that was cruel enough. It was in the $10 bill she pushed into my palm. $10, as if that was the sum total of my worth after decades of building a family. It wasn't meant to help. It was meant to humiliate. "For gas," she said with a smile that carried no warmth. In that moment, my place in the family I thought was unshakable crumbled into dust. I walked past the suitcases already stacked by the door, past photographs that still hung on the wall, mocking me with frozen smiles from a life that no longer existed. My feet felt like stone as I crossed the threshold, but inside me something darker was taking root. Humiliation burns hot, but beneath it was the slow, steady ember of resolve. That first night, I found myself in a cheap motel on the edge of town, the kind of place where the carpets reek of disinfectant and the walls are thin enough to hear strangers argue in the next room. The hum of traffic outside was relentless, a cruel reminder that the world moved on while my life stood in ruins. I sat on the sagging mattress and unfolded the $10 bill again and again, the green edges softening with each pass. It was supposed to be a gesture of dismissal, but I began to see it as a challenge. Was this really all my life amounted to? Was this the way my story ended, cast aside with a bill that wouldn't even buy a decent dinner? No. That was the night I promised myself I would not stay broken. They had cut me down, but I would rebuild. And when the time came, they would see the cost of betrayal in ways they could never imagine. Before I continue, let me ask you, have you ever been betrayed by the very people you gave everything to? Tell me in the comments. The motel room became my prison, and every detail reminded me of what I had lost. The carpet was stiff with years of neglect. The air smelled faintly of mildew, and the humming neon sign outside painted the walls with an artificial red glow that made sleep nearly impossible. At 60, I had thought my toughest days were behind me. I had worked construction, provided for a family, and believed loyalty was the reward for sacrifice. But sitting on that thin mattress, staring at the ceiling, I realized loyalty could vanish overnight, replaced by greed and convenience. The first morning, I ate instant noodles made with tap water heated in the motel's battered microwave. My hands shook as I tore open the flavor packet. Once those same hands had framed houses and poured foundations, but now they were feeding me powdered broth and stale noodles. I told myself it was temporary, that I would find steady work again. But the truth hit hard. My references, my network, even my reputation, had been stripped along with my home. All I had left was the ache in my back and the cruel echo of my daughter's words. I tried odd jobs at first, washing dishes at a diner where the grease never came off my skin, hauling bricks for a contractor who paid cash at the end of the day. I fell into bed each night with my muscles screaming, the smell of sweat and exhaustion clinging to me. Each paycheck barely covered the motel bill and cheap meals, but I held on to it like a lifeline. Every dollar meant one more day I hadn't collapsed completely. Still, humiliation stalked me. Once, while cleaning tables, I saw a family laughing together over breakfast. The daughter looked about the same age Tatum had been when she used to sit at our kitchen counter, swinging her legs and begging me to make pancakes. The memory struck like a hammer. I dropped a stack of plates, shattering them across the diner floor. The manager barked at me to clean it up, and I did, swallowing every ounce of pride left in me. But as much as it hurt, rock bottom had its lessons. It stripped away illusion. It showed me who I was without the safety net of family or comfort. At night, I would walk past boarded-up houses on the edge of town, broken windows, weeds clawing through the yard's roofs, sagging under years of neglect. Most people saw ruins. I saw possibility. I thought of the years I had spent in construction, the knowledge still buried in my calloused hands. If no one else believed in me, maybe I could rebuild something myself. I started visiting the library between shifts, checking out books on plumbing, electrical work, and small-scale renovations. I scoured YouTube videos late at night, scribbling notes in a battered notebook I kept by the bed. It wasn't just study, it was survival. Each page, filled with sketches and calculations, became a reminder that I was more than the man cast out with $10. I was still capable. I was still dangerous if I chose to be. That's when a new thought began to settle into my mind. Maybe the best revenge wasn't anger. Maybe it was proof that I could turn their insult into the foundation of something far greater. And let me ask you, have you ever taken the pain someone gave you and turned it into fuel? I'll never forget the day I stopped seeing that $10 bill as an insult and started seeing it as a challenge. For weeks, it had sat folded in my wallet, every crease a reminder of the humiliation I had endured. But one afternoon, after another shift of scraping grease off diner plates, I pulled it out and stared at it under the dim light of the motel lamp. $10. That was what they thought I was worth. And suddenly, I decided I would make it the seed of something they couldn't imagine. My chance came in the form of a condemned house on Beacon Hill. Most people avoided that neighborhood, calling it unsafe, a place where dreams went to die. The property was listed for $42,000, and it looked every bit of its price: sagging porch, broken windows, peeling paint. But beneath the decay, I saw bones that could hold weight. My construction years had trained my eyes to see past the rot. Where others saw collapse, I saw potential. I scraped together what little I had left from the divorce settlement and every dollar I'd earned from labor jobs. Signing that purchase contract felt like gambling my very survival. Failure would mean homelessness. Success could mean freedom. I threw myself into the work 16 hours a day. I learned plumbing by trial and error, watched videos about wiring, and tore out walls until my arms ached so badly I could barely lift a hammer the next morning. Neighbors thought I was crazy. I'd hear them whisper as they passed, wondering why an old man was breaking his back on a hopeless property. But each swing of the hammer felt like a blow against the voices in my head, the ones that told me I was finished, worthless, discarded. I kept going night after night, fueled by instant coffee and sheer stubbornness. 4 months later, the house stood reborn. Fresh paint gleamed in the morning light. The porch no longer sagged, and the interior smelled of clean wood instead of mildew. When I sold it that December, the profit came to $65,000. I sat in my car after the closing, the check trembling in my hands. For the first time since being thrown out, I felt like I had more than survival. I had momentum. That profit didn't erase the betrayal, but it reframed it. If they hadn't pushed me out, I might never have taken this risk. Their cruelty had lit the fire that forced me to act. I rolled the check between my fingers and thought of Tatum's smirk as she pressed that bill into my palm. She thought she had ended me. She had no idea she had just made me dangerous. From that moment, I knew this was only the beginning. I wasn't just building houses anymore, I was building a new life. And one day, when the time was right, they would see exactly what that $10 dismissal had created. Tell me, have you ever looked back at your darkest moment and realized it was the very thing that saved you? The first property sale lit a fire I couldn't put out. With $65,000 in profit, I had something I hadn't felt in years: choice. I could have eased up, paid rent for a decent apartment, maybe even tried to patch up my pride. But I wasn't interested in comfort. I was interested in power. Because every swing of the hammer, every nail I drove into rotting wood was no longer just for survival. It was for the day I would stand face to face with the family who had discarded me. I poured the entire profit into the next project, a foreclosure in Queen Anne. It cost $200,000 more than I'd ever dared risk, but I knew location was everything. The house was half-finished, abandoned by a failed developer. Where others saw a money pit, I saw a shortcut. With 6 months of backbreaking work and strategic hiring of a few loyal contractors, I paid in cash. The property sold for $420,000. That single flip doubled my net worth. From then on, I didn't stop. Winter became spring, spring became summer, and every season brought a new house, a new profit, a new lesson. I learned how to negotiate with banks, how to read zoning laws, how to spot hidden structural issues before signing a deal. My old hands, once blistered from carrying bricks for someone else's paycheck, now guided renovations that multiplied my own wealth. By the end of the first year, I had crossed the $1 million mark. But money wasn't the real prize. The real prize was transformation. I was no longer the man who had slumped on a motel bed staring at a $10 insult. I was a man with marble countertops in his kitchen, leather chairs in his office, and a view of Lake Washington that reminded me every morning how far I'd come. Each new success was like polishing armor piece by piece until I was ready for war. And make no mistake, I was preparing for war. I didn't flaunt my success publicly. I kept it quiet, hidden behind LLCs and business accounts. To Lorna and Tatum, I was still the man who had left with nothing. They lived in the comfort of their assumptions, never suspecting that every headline about a local investor revitalizing neighborhoods had my fingerprints on it. They thought they had erased me. In reality, I was sharpening the blade of patience. I'd walk through my new home, Italian marble foyer, gourmet kitchen, silk curtains, and feel a strange mix of pride and anger. Pride at what I had built with my own 2 hands, and anger at the people who had forced me onto this path. My wealth was no accident. It was a direct consequence of their betrayal. And when they eventually came knocking, as I knew they would be ready. Have you ever worked in silence, waiting for the perfect moment to reveal what you've become? By the second year, I hardly recognized myself anymore. Not because of the suits I now wore or the lakefront house I lived in, but because of the steel I had forged inside. The man who once begged for a roof over his head in a motel was gone. In his place stood someone who understood that resilience was built not in comfort, but in fire. Each morning became a ritual. I ground fresh coffee beans, spread out the Wall Street Journal, and reviewed property portfolios while sunlight turned Lake Washington into molten gold. It was the kind of life I had once dreamed of, but never dared believe possible. I hadn't stumbled into this wealth, it had been earned with sweat sacrifice and the relentless refusal to stay down. Every house I rebuilt felt like reclaiming a piece of my dignity brick by brick. On the wall of my office, I kept the framed purchase contract from that first condemned property, not because of the money it represented, but because it was proof that the lowest moment of my life had become the foundation of everything that followed. Beside it, I pinned before and after photos of every house I had touched, proof that nothing was beyond repair, not even me. But what mattered most wasn't the money or the homes, it was the silence. Lorna and Tatum had cut me off, convinced I was finished. They never called, never checked, never wondered if I had survived. To them, I had disappeared. And that invisibility was my greatest weapon. I worked in the shadows, building strength where no one thought to look. Late at night, I would sit by the window with a glass of whiskey, watching the city lights blur across the lake. I thought of the night I left with $10 and the smug look on my daughter's face. It was no longer just a painful memory, it was fuel. I knew the day would come when they realized I was not the man they had discarded, and when that day arrived, I wouldn't need to raise my voice. My very existence would be the answer to their betrayal. Still, even as I savored my victories, I never forgot the lessons of those first dark weeks. Humiliation had taught me patience. Poverty had taught me resourcefulness. Betrayal had taught me clarity. These were lessons no school or business mentor could provide. They were carved into me by experience, and they made me stronger than wealth ever could. I looked again at the $10 bill I had kept all this time, still folded and tucked inside my wallet. To anyone else, it was just paper. To me, it was the reminder that I had once been measured at my lowest value, and that I had rewritten the definition of my worth. I didn't know when the call would come, but I knew it was coming, and when it did, I would be ready. Let me ask you, have you ever waited for the moment when life would give you the chance to turn pain into justice? The phone rang on a rainy Thursday evening, its sharp tone cutting through the quiet hum of my office like a blade. I almost didn't look at the screen. Business calls, contractors, investors, those were the only voices I expected anymore. But when I saw the name glowing back at me, I froze. Tatum. 2 years of silence, and suddenly there she was, her name lit up as if nothing had happened. My fingers hovered over the phone before I answered. Hello, Tatum. I kept my voice even controlled, though my chest felt tight. Daddy, she said, her voice dripping with that same sugary sweetness. I remembered the kind she used when she wanted something. I've missed you so much. The words felt like sandpaper against my ears. Missed me. This was the same daughter who handed me a $10 bill and told me I didn't belong. Now she wanted to pretend we could just pick up where we left off. I wanted to invite you to dinner this Saturday, she continued. We could catch up, maybe start fresh. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring out at the rain streaking down the glass wall of my office. City lights blurred into streaks across Lake Washington, a far cry from the dingy motel window where I once watched taillights disappear into the night. Her timing wasn't coincidence. She didn't call because she missed me. She called because she needed something. Dinner, I repeated, letting the word linger, tasting its bitterness. Yes, she pressed on. Mom's making that roast you used to love. We'll all be together again, like old times. Old times. I almost laughed. Old times ended the day she and her mother tossed me aside like garbage. But I didn't laugh. I didn't yell. Instead, I let silence stretch across the line, forcing her to fill it. I know it's been complicated, she said, her voice faltering just slightly. But we could put the past behind us. Family should be together. I glanced at the edge of an old photograph tucked under a stack of real estate contracts, me, Tatum, and Lorna smiling like a happy family. I turned it face down on the desk. 2 years ago, you told me I didn't belong in that family. Quite a memory gap you've developed. On the other end, her breathing changed. Shallow, quick, betraying nerves behind the practiced sweetness. Daddy, I don't understand what wealth you're talking about, she stammered. I just want us to reconnect. Of course she did. And of course it had nothing to do with me, only what she thought I had. Saturday evening, I said finally. 6 o'clock at the old house. Yes, relief flooded her voice, so obvious it was almost pathetic. Oh, Daddy, that's wonderful. But I didn't share her joy. My answer wasn't acceptance. It was strategy, because if she wanted me back in that house, then that house would become the stage where she finally learned the cost of betrayal. Tell me, if you were in my shoes, would you accept that invitation? Or would you hang up and let them drown? When I hung up the phone that night, the house grew unnervingly quiet. The only sound was the steady percussion of rain against the windows. I sat at my mahogany desk, the glow of my banker's lamp reflecting across polished wood, and thought about what had just happened. 2 years of silence, and suddenly my daughter wanted me at her table again. Not out of love, not out of longing, out of need. I could smell it in her voice like smoke before a fire. For a long time, I just swirled the whiskey in my glass, watching the amber liquid catch the light. That dinner invitation wasn't a gesture of reconciliation. It was bait. She wanted me to walk willingly into the same house where she and her mother had cast me out. They thought time had softened me, that success had made me sentimental, that maybe I was still desperate for scraps of affection. They didn't realize I had built something stronger than nostalgia. I had built power. I accepted the invitation not to rejoin them, but to study them. The dinner table would be my battlefield, and every smile, every word, every gesture would be ammunition. I would sit across from them not as the discarded husband or the humiliated father, but as the man they had underestimated into a fortune. The moment they reached for what they believed was theirs, I would be ready. Still, I knew appearances mattered. I couldn't walk into that house wearing armor too thick. They needed to believe I was still vulnerable, still reachable. I had learned in business that the best deals were struck when the other side thought they held the leverage. So I would give them that illusion just long enough to watch them betray themselves. The next few days, I reviewed property portfolios during the day and rehearsed my responses at night. I practiced how I would smile at their fake warmth, how I would let silence linger until they revealed what they really wanted. And when the moment came, I would steer the conversation exactly where it needed to go. As I prepared, memories bled back in uninvited. I remembered the last family dinner I attended in that house, how Tatum had laughed at some story, while her mother scrolled on her phone, both of them already halfway gone from me. I remembered thinking something felt off, though I couldn't name it then. Now I knew they were already planning my removal. This time I would walk into that dining room with eyes wide open. I set down my glass and looked around my office. Every inch of it, every book, every file, every photograph was proof that I had rebuilt from ashes. This wasn't about revenge alone. It was about reclaiming my place, not in their family, but in my own story. They had stolen my ending once. I would not let them write the next chapter. So yes, I would attend that dinner. Not as their victim, but as the author of their reckoning. And I ask you, if the very people who betrayed you invited you back, would you go to forgive them? Or would you go to remind them who you had become? 2 days after that call, I decided to give my daughter a test. Not the kind you study for, but the kind that strips away pretense and leaves only truth. I wanted to know if there was even a fragment of love left in her heart, or if greed had replaced it entirely. I sat in my office, the rain steady against the glass phone in one hand and a notepad in the other. On the pad, I scribbled words I planned to say, each one measured to sound convincing: lost everything, bankruptcy, foreclosure. Lies, of course. My bank statements showed an 8-figure portfolio properties across the city generating income daily, but if Tatum believed I was ruined, her response would reveal her soul. I rehearsed my tone twice, injecting just enough tremor to sound like a defeated man. Then I dialed. She answered on the second ring, voice bright and eager like a fisherman tugging on a line she thought had hooked a catch. "Dad, I was hoping you'd call," she said. "Tatum." I began forcing weariness into my words. "I've got terrible news. My investments. The market crashed. I lost almost everything." Silence. Not the silence of sympathy, but the silence of calculation. I counted in my head 5, 10, 12 seconds before she spoke. "How much is everything?" she asked, her voice clipped sharp. I let out a practiced sigh. "I'm meeting with bankruptcy lawyers next week. If I'm lucky, I'll have enough for a small apartment." Another pause. This one shorter. Then the mask slipped. "Well, if that's the case, maybe Saturday dinner isn't such a good idea." Her words cut, not because I needed her, but because they proved everything I suspected. 2 years ago, she had thrown me out with $10. Tonight, she had thrown me out again, only this time with words. No compassion, no offer of support, not even a hollow platitude about family. Just cold dismissal. "I understand," I said evenly, though my chest burned. "Thank you for being direct." Before she could add another excuse, I ended the call. The click of disconnection rang louder than her voice ever could. For a long moment, I stared at the silent phone in my hand. 28 years of fatherhood reduced to a transaction. If money was gone, so was she. I opened the recording app on my phone and saved the conversation. Not because I needed proof for myself, I already knew who she was, but because truth has power when captured in black and white. Her voice, her indifference, her betrayal, they were all there. Evidence. I leaned back in my chair, watching the city lights ripple against the rain-slick glass. She thought she had ended the story. In reality, she had just confirmed the next chapter. And let me ask you, if your own child revealed they cared only for your wealth, would you still give them a chance? Or would you use that betrayal as fuel for justice? I sat in my office long after the call ended, the city outside glowing like a field of embers through the rain-streaked glass. On my desk sat my phone screen, dark, but inside it lived the truth I had been waiting for. One recording. One conversation. My daughter's own voice betraying every pretense of love. No one could deny it. Now she had measured me only by dollars, and when those disappeared, so did she. I replayed the call once, letting her words cut again, not because I enjoyed the sting, but because I wanted to etch them into memory. "Maybe Saturday dinner isn't such a good idea." I whispered it back to myself, almost tasting the bitterness on my tongue. 2 years ago, she gave me $10 to leave. Tonight, she had given me nothing at all. That was who she had become. But if the call proved her motives, it also gave me clarity. This wasn't just about personal betrayal anymore. Something deeper was hiding beneath her desperation. People don't call after 2 years of silence unless they need more than forgiveness. I remembered the slight tremor in her voice, the way she stumbled over her excuses. She wasn't just trying to lure me back into the family circle, she was drowning in some mess of her own. I pulled a fresh legal pad from my drawer and began to write. Tatum, Lorna, questions. What were they hiding? Why now? Why so eager to bring me back to the table? I had learned the hard way that betrayal always carried layers, and the top layer was rarely the whole truth. The next morning, I called an old acquaintance, a man who had once been an FBI investigator before moving into private work. His name was Marcus Reed, and his specialty was peeling back facades until the rot underneath showed. We arranged to meet in his downtown office overlooking Elliott Bay. When I arrived, Reed greeted me with a firm handshake and sharp eyes that missed nothing. His walls were lined with diplomas and commendations, but what struck me most was the order of his desk. Neat stacks, no wasted space, a man who valued precision. You mentioned on the phone this was a family matter, he said, sliding a fresh folder across the desk. Tell me exactly what you need. My daughter and ex-wife have reached out for financial help, I told him, keeping my tone measured, professional. I need to know everything before I make a decision: legal vulnerabilities, fraudulent activities, misrepresented circumstances. If they've built their lives on deception, I want proof. Reed nodded once, making notes with quick strokes of his pen. 1 week. I'll give you a comprehensive report. Fee is $5,000, expenses included. I pulled out my checkbook without hesitation. Money wasn't the issue. The truth was, as I slid the signed check across the desk, I felt something I hadn't in years: control. The kind of control that comes from knowing you're not just reacting to betrayal, you're preparing to dismantle it piece by piece. So let me ask you, if you had undeniable proof of betrayal, would you confront your family head-on? Or would you wait until the moment they least expected it? 1 week later, I sat across from Marcus Reed again, the Seattle skyline stretching wide behind him. His desk was no longer empty. 2 thick folders sat neatly stacked, their edges bristling with documents, screenshots, and official seals. He didn't waste time with pleasantries. He simply slid the first folder toward me. Your daughter, he said. Tatum operated an online business called Lux Living Essentials from January through October of last year. On paper, it looked like a lifestyle brand, home goods, furniture, decor. In reality, it was little more than smoke and mirrors. I opened the folder. My stomach tightened as I flipped through screenshots of product listings, luxury sofas, handcrafted tables, custom lighting. Beautiful, polished images. But then came the complaints. Dozens of them. Customers demanding refunds, claiming their orders never arrived. Payment records showed nearly $150,000 collected, yet almost nothing shipped. It wasn't incompetence. It was fraud. She took the money and disappeared. Reed continued. Some customers considered organizing legal action, but they lacked evidence and cohesion. Until now. I felt my jaw clench. My daughter hadn't just turned her back on me, she had turned her back on strangers who trusted her. Families who saved for dining sets that never existed. People who believed her fake promises. The face I once cradled in my hands had become the mask of a con artist. Before I could speak, Reed slid the second folder forward. Your ex-wife. Inside were screenshots of Instagram posts. Lorna's face pale and weary, framed by hospital beds and IV lines. Captions pleading for prayers for help with mounting medical bills. The donation totals were staggering, over $200,000 raised in 18 months. Medical fraud. Reed explained, tapping a set of official hospital records clipped to the file. No serious illness. In fact, routine checkups show she's in excellent health. She fabricated everything. A sympathy scheme. Tax records show none of the donations were reported. That's unreported income federal offense. I stared at the evidence until the words blurred. I thought betrayal had limits. I thought greed explained their cruelty toward me. But this wasn't just greed, it was predation. Tatum and Lorna hadn't just betrayed me. They had betrayed everyone who crossed their path. Reed leaned back in his chair, his voice steady. Together, these actions create a web of fraud that could collapse with the slightest legal pressure. Civil suits, federal tax investigations, criminal charges. They've built a house of cards. I closed the folders slowly, the weight of them sinking into my chest. For the first time in years, I wasn't haunted by memories of being thrown out with $10. Instead, I felt something far sharper. Certainty. I didn't need revenge born of anger. I needed justice born of proof. I shook Reed's hand and slid the folders into my briefcase. Excellent work. Send your final invoice to my office. Walking back to my car, I felt taller somehow. They thought they could manipulate me with false warmth and crocodile tears. But the truth was now in my hands. And when the time came, the same evidence they ignored would be the very blade that cut them down. And I wonder if you discovered your own family had lied and stolen, not only from you, but from innocent strangers, would you expose them, or would you stay silent to preserve a name already poisoned? It didn't take long for the phone to ring again. This time, the name on the screen wasn't Tatum's, it was Lorna's. For a moment, I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. I slid my reading glasses off, set them beside a contract I'd been reviewing, and answered. Harlon? She began, her voice syrupy sweet, too polished to be natural. I hope I'm not interrupting anything important. You never worried about that before, I said flatly. What do you need? There was a pause, a shuffle of papers in the background, and then a rehearsed tremor entered her voice. It's about Tatum. She's facing some unexpected financial difficulties, legal threats, creditors. She could lose everything. I sat back in my chair, pen tapping against the pad beside me. The desperation wasn't even well disguised. Behind her words, I could hear whispers, faint but unmistakable. Tatum's voice coaching her mother through the script. 50,000, Lorna said suddenly, the number falling too quickly from her lips. That would solve the immediate crisis. Ask for more, Mom, came Tatum's sharp whisper, carrying clearly through the cheap speakerphone. I smiled to myself. They weren't even careful. Their own greed betrayed them before I had to say a word. 50,000, I repeated, my tone as cool as glass. And what makes you think I have that kind of money lying around? I've heard things, Lorna stammered. About your success. People talk, you know. People talk about many things, I replied, swiveling my chair toward the rain-slick window. Outside, the city glittered against the dark water, a world away from the cramped Tacoma kitchen where they once dismissed me. Harlon, please, she pressed on. She's your daughter. Family means something. I let the silence hang just long enough to cut her off at the knees. Then I spoke slowly, every word deliberate. My daughter threw me out with $10 and called me a failure. Now she needs 50,000 from a failure. Interesting arithmetic. On the other end, Tatum's whisper rose again, sharp and anxious. Tell him it was different. Tell him we can fix this. But I was done listening. Not 1 cent, I said, my voice steady as bedrock. Not now. Not ever. I ended the call mid-sentence, setting the phone down, as if it carried a bad smell. For a moment, I simply sat in the quiet, the rain pattering a steady rhythm on the glass. I felt no guilt, no hesitation. They had shown me who they were, and I believed them. Still, I knew this wouldn't be the end of their efforts. Desperate people don't retreat at the first refusal. They regroup, re-strategize, and come back harder. And I would be ready armed not only with their voices on tape, but with folders of evidence that could destroy them at the right time. The first round of their counterattack had been clumsy, but I knew the next would cut deeper. And I ask you, if your family begged you for help, after years of betrayal, would you give them mercy, or would you let them taste the consequences of their own choices? 2 days after Lorna's clumsy plea for $50,000, Tatum herself called. This time her voice wasn't syrupy. It was frantic, pitched just right to sound like a drowning woman gasping for air. "Dad, you don't understand," she began before I even had a chance to say hello. "Everything is falling apart. Customers are threatening lawsuits. People are spreading lies about me online. If I don't fix this soon, I'll lose everything I've worked for." I let her speak without interruption, jotting notes on the pad beside me: lawsuits, customers, lies. Every word she threw out was carefully rehearsed, crafted to sound like victimhood. But the folder Reed had given me sat open on my desk, filled with screenshots of fake product listings and unanswered complaints. She wasn't a victim, she was the architect of her own disaster. "What exactly do you need to fix this?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral, almost sympathetic. She hesitated, then dropped the number with practiced precision. 200,000. Just enough to cover refunds and stabilize the business. After that, I can rebuild. 200,000. Her voice cracked slightly on the word, as if she thought it might scare me. To her, that sum was a desperate reach for survival. To me, it was proof of arrogance. She thought money could buy her way out of deception. "That's quite specific," I said slowly. "Sounds more like cash flow issues than lies being spread." "Dad, please," she pressed, turning up the emotion. "I know I made mistakes, but family helps each other, right? I can make this right if you just give me a chance." Family. She tossed that word out like it still meant something, like it wasn't shattered the night she handed me $10 and told me I didn't belong. Before I could respond, another voice chimed in faintly from the background. Lorna's steady and calculated. "Tell him you'll pay him back. Promise him returns. Sweeten it." Tatum swallowed hard, then added, "I'll pay you back with interest, Dad. It won't just be a loan, it'll be a partnership." That word partnership hit me harder than any plea for love. They weren't even pretending anymore. I wasn't a father. I was an investor, a checkbook, a potential bailout. I let out a quiet breath. "We'll talk about it at dinner," I said at last. The relief in her voice was immediate, almost childlike. "Thank you, Daddy. You won't regret this." But as I ended the call and closed the folder on my desk, my thoughts hardened. She was right about one thing: I wouldn't regret this, because I had no intention of giving her 200,000. What I intended to give her was a lesson in accountability so sharp it would scar her memory forever. And let me ask you, if you discovered your child could lie to your face without hesitation, would you call them out right then? Or would you wait for the perfect moment to let the truth bury them? The next call came on a Sunday evening, right when the sun was setting over the lake, turning the water into a sheet of hammered copper. I knew who it was before I even glanced at the phone. "Lorna," I answered anyway, curious how she'd spin the next chapter of their performance. "Harlon?" She began, her tone softer now, as if rehearsed from a different script. "We've been thinking. Maybe we've made mistakes in the past. But we're still family, and family should stick together." That word again. Family. Rolled off her tongue like a magic charm meant to unlock the vault of my forgiveness. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the framed photograph of our daughter when she was 12, braces and bright eyes long before deceit hardened her expression. "What exactly are you asking me to stick together on?" I asked, keeping my tone even. She hesitated just long enough for me to hear the shuffle of papers. Then came the pitch. "If you help Tatum now, it won't just save her business. It'll rebuild our family. We could all sit down, find peace, move forward together." Peace. The irony nearly made me laugh. I had lived through their version of peace, being pushed out with $10, sleeping in a motel, eating instant noodles while they played house with Grady. Now, because their schemes were collapsing, peace suddenly mattered. "Your daughter needs to understand that choices have consequences," I said calmly. "She's young," Harlon Lorna pressed. "She made mistakes, but she's learning. Don't let this be the end of your relationship with her." I caught the faint rustle again, the sound of Tatum listening in. Then her voice cut through the line, raw and shaky. "Dad, please. Don't let money come between us. We're family. You raised me better than this." That was the moment my patience solidified into resolve. They weren't reaching out with humility. They were reaching out with manipulation, using the very bond they had already severed as a weapon against me. I let silence stretch for a beat too long, then asked, "Tell me something, Tatum. 2 years ago, when you told me I didn't belong in that house, was that family speaking?" The line went quiet. No whispering, no rehearsed excuses. Just silence. Then faintly, "That was different." "No," I said firmly. "That was honest. What you're saying now is desperation, and I won't confuse the two." I ended the call before they could scramble for more words. The phone lay on my desk screen, dark again, while outside the lake caught the last light of day. For a moment I felt almost sorry for them. Almost. Because I knew something they didn't. Their attempts to weaponize family had only sharpened my strategy. They thought they were cornering me. In truth, they were walking straight into the trap I was setting. And let me ask you, if someone betrayed you once, and then tried to use family loyalty as leverage, would you forgive them? Or would you see it as the final proof of who they truly are? After their last call, I knew it was time to stop listening and start moving. Tatum and Lorna believed they were closing in on me, but they didn't realize I already had their entire world on paper. Contracts, screenshots, bank statements, donation records. And more importantly, I had allies waiting to be found. Victims. The people they had left in their wake. I called Marcus Reed and asked for the contact list he had compiled, customers who had been defrauded by Tatum's so-called business. Within hours, I had 23 names and numbers. School teachers, small business owners, parents saving for furniture that never came. Each entry was a story of betrayal that mirrored my own. The first call I made was to a woman named Wren, a teacher from Tacoma. Her voice was cautious when she answered, but when I explained why I was calling, the floodgates opened. I saved for 8 months for that dining room set. She said, her words tight with suppressed anger. $5,000 gone. She stopped answering my emails. I thought I'd never see justice. "You're not alone anymore," I told her. "I have evidence and I have a lawyer who's willing to fight, but it will mean standing together." For a moment there was silence. Then I heard it, the sound of someone finally being heard. "If you're serious," Wren said, "I'll stand with you. I've been waiting for this chance." One by one I made the calls. At first, skepticism met me at every turn. They had been ignored for so long that hope felt dangerous. But when I explained that I wasn't just another angry customer, when I told them I was Tatum's father and that I had hard proof of her fraud, the mood shifted. Suspicion turned to eagerness, then to relief. By the end of the evening, I had 23 voices committed to moving forward. With each call, I felt the weight in my chest ease. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about all of us who had been lied to, dismissed, cheated. Their anger became fuel for my plan, and their trust became my responsibility. Later that night, I sat at my desk, flipping through the stack of names and notes I had taken during each conversation. Every story painted the same picture. Tatum hadn't just betrayed her father, she had built an entire business model on betrayal. That kind of deceit didn't deserve quiet forgiveness. It deserved to be exposed in the harshest light possible. I poured myself a glass of whiskey and raised it toward the folders spread across my desk like battle maps. To truth, I muttered. Not revenge, not even justice in the abstract. Truth. The kind that strips away every excuse and leaves nothing but accountability. And so the pieces fell into place. While Lorna and Tatum whispered rehearsed lines into a cheap speakerphone, I was aligning an army of voices. When the time came, their lies wouldn't collapse because of me alone. They would collapse under the weight of everyone they had wronged. And I'll ask you, have you ever realized that the most powerful weapon against a liar isn't anger, but the chorus of every person they've deceived? By the time Friday rolled around, my office looked less like a home workspace and more like a war room. Marcus Reed's files were spread across my mahogany desk in perfect order: fraud documentation, customer statements, screenshots of fake products, bank records of unreported donations. Each stack was a weapon, each page a bullet ready to fire. And now, with 23 victims united behind me, I wasn't just one man fighting a personal war. I was carrying an army into battle. The battlefield, a dinner table. The very table where my daughter once smirked while handing me a $10 bill would become the place where her lies finally collapsed. And I would be there not as their victim, but as the one who orchestrated the reckoning. I met with my lawyer Merritt Klein that afternoon in his downtown office. A longtime friend, Merritt had seen me through good years and bad, but never like this. As he flipped through the evidence, his brows knit tighter with every page. "This is airtight, Harlon," he said, tapping the lawsuit packet. "Intentional fraud, not negligence. We can file a class action suit on behalf of every victim you've gathered. The process server can be at their house by Saturday evening." During dinner, I said firmly. Merritt looked up. "You want maximum impact?" "Exactly. They need to be served when their guard is down. No hiding behind excuses, no buying time. They'll be cornered in front of each other, in front of their own family." He leaned back, studying me. "This won't just humiliate them, Harlan. It will destroy them." I met his gaze without flinching. They destroyed themselves. I'm just pulling the curtain back. By the time I left his office, the plan was locked. 7:30 p.m. Sharp, the process server would arrive. At 8:00, Jessica Chen, an investigative journalist I'd contacted, would publish her article exposing Lorna's fake medical fundraiser and unreported income. The timing wasn't just tactical, it was poetic. First, Tatum's fraudulent empire would collapse in her hands. Then, while she scrambled, Lorna's glamorous online persona would implode in real time. Saturday morning, I packed a small gift box wrapped in fine paper tied with a ribbon. Inside was nothing, an empty shell. But symbolism mattered. I would place it on their table as a silent promise: you thought I had come with gifts, but what you're really receiving tonight is the truth. As I stood by the window that evening, the city lights flickering across Lake Washington, I felt no hesitation. For 2 years they believed I was broken, worthless, erased. But they had forgotten one simple fact. Sometimes the most dangerous man in the room is the one who has already lost everything once. The dinner would not be a reunion. It would be an execution, legal, precise, and irreversible. And let me ask you, if you had the power to expose betrayal in front of the very people who once mocked you, would you do it quietly, or would you choose the moment when it would sting the most? The house looked smaller than I remembered when I pulled into the driveway that Saturday evening. Warm light spilled from the dining room windows, glowing soft and welcoming. But I knew it was nothing more than theater. 2 years ago, this same house had been my prison of humiliation. Tonight, it was my stage. I carried the small gift box in one hand, empty but wrapped elegantly, and rang the bell. Lorna opened the door with rehearsed enthusiasm. "Harlon, you look wonderful," she said, her jewelry catching the light. "Success suits you." "It's good to be back in this house," I replied, stepping over the threshold where she once pushed me out with $10. Brings back memories. The dining room was dressed for performance candles, flickering over polished china. The roast, she mentioned, filling the air with a nostalgic scent. Tatum emerged from the kitchen, smoothing the front of her dress, her smile as brittle as porcelain. "Dad," she said, embracing me just a second too long. "I'm so glad you came." I set the gift box down on the sideboard, my smile calm. "I brought a surprise for later. Good things come to those who wait." We sat, and for the first 20 minutes, conversation danced on the surface. Polite questions about health, small jokes about the weather, all of it carefully choreographed to lull me into trust. But I wasn't here to trust. I was here to watch. We were thinking. Tatum began right on cue. "Since you've been so successful with investments, maybe we could discuss a family partnership." "Family is everything," Lorna added smoothly, reaching across to pat my hand. I glanced at the clock. 7:28. "Success does suit you too, Tatum," I said, keeping my tone light. "You look like someone who has it all figured out." Her smile widened, almost triumphant. "It's not really a loan," she explained. "It's a partnership between father and daughter. 200,000 would solve a few cash flow issues and set us up for great returns." I let the words hang, savoring the irony. 200,000 to cover fraudulent debts she thought I didn't know about. 200,000 for furniture that never existed. Then, at precisely 7:30, the doorbell rang. Tatum frowned. "Were we expecting anyone?" "How unexpected," I said, leaning back in my chair. "Remarkable timing." She excused herself with a tight smile and walked to the door. Through the dining room archway, I saw her freeze as a man in a business suit greeted her. "Tatum Voss, you are being served with legal documents on behalf of King County Superior Court. Please sign here acknowledging receipt." Her face drained of color as the man handed her the thick packet. This must be a mistake," she stammered. The process server's voice remained calm, professional. "You are named as defendant in a class action lawsuit concerning fraudulent business practices and customer deception." The papers trembled in her hands as she stumbled back into the dining room. Lorna's smile collapsed. Grady shifted uncomfortably in his chair, sensing cracks he couldn't quite see. I sipped my water, steady as stone. The first blow had landed. "And I ask you, if you could deliver justice to those who betrayed you, would you savor their shock or simply watch in silence as the truth crushed them?" The dining room had fallen into uneasy silence. Tatum sat rigid in her chair, the lawsuit packet clenched in her hands, her face pale as candle wax. She skimmed through the first pages, her lips moving, as if reading the words might change their meaning. Across from her, Lorna straightened her shoulders, slipping into the role of problem solver. "This is ridiculous," she said sharply. "We'll get a lawyer, make a few calls. It's all a misunderstanding." I leaned back, letting her dig deeper into her own delusion. She didn't realize her turn was about to arrive. At precisely 8 Sirher, as if on cue, Lorna's phone buzzed. Then it buzzed again, and again. She pulled it out with the smug air of someone expecting reinforcements. Instead, her eyes widened. Notifications flooded her screen in a digital avalanche. Hundreds of comments. Thousands. What on earth? She whispered, scrolling. Her hands began to shake. Grady leaned over her shoulder. Lorna, what is this? The glow from her phone illuminated her face as the headline appeared in bold letters. Local influencer exposed for faking illness, over $200,000 in donations misused. The Seattle Tribune article was live. Jessica Chen had delivered right on time. Screenshots of Lorna's Instagram posts filled the article, smiling weakly in hospital beds, hooked to fake IVs captions begging for sympathy. And beside them, the cold truth medical records proving she was in perfect health donation totals, traced directly into her personal accounts. No, Lorna whispered, her voice cracking. She tried scrolling faster as though speed could erase the evidence. But every swipe only revealed more damning details: tax evasion, unreported income testimonies from donors demanding refunds. Her glamorous empire of deception had been dismantled in a matter of paragraphs. What illness? Lorna Grady's voice was sharp now, eyes narrowing as he connected the dots. You told me you were sick. You let me believe their lies, she snapped, but the conviction was gone. Her hands trembled so badly she nearly dropped the phone. Comments flooded in, faster than she could delete them. Angry followers, betrayed donors, furious families who had sent money believing her sob stories. Cancer patients, one comment read, glaring in bold text on her screen. You stole from people actually fighting for their lives. The roast on the table had gone cold. Candles sputtered, as though they too sensed the collapse unfolding around us. I folded my hands calmly in my lap, watching the implosion. First, the daughter served at the door with the weight of her fraud. Now the mother exposed to the world for her manufactured sickness. Their faces told me everything: the realization that they were no longer in control, that the lies they had spun so carefully were unraveling faster than they could grab hold. Help us, Harlon, Lorna finally said, her voice stripped of pretense. Use your resources. Make this go away. Make it go away, I repeated softly. Justice doesn't vanish because you're uncomfortable with it. The second bomb had landed, and the tremors would keep spreading long after the last candle burned out. And I'll ask you, if you saw someone profit from faking illness, would you turn away, or would you demand they face the shame they earned? The dining room was no longer a place of warmth and reunion. It had become a courtroom without a judge. Tatum's lawsuit packet lay open on the table, pages scattered like evidence in plain sight. Lorna's phone buzzed endlessly, every new notification, a nail in the coffin of her fabricated image. The air was thick with smoke that wasn't really there, only the acrid smell of panic. Tatum was the first to break. Dad, please, she whispered, her eyes wet, but her hands clutching the papers with white knuckles. I didn't mean for it to go this far. People were impatient, that's all. If you just help me now, I can pay them back, make it right. Her voice cracked, but I had heard enough cracks in her stories to know the difference between desperation and remorse. This was desperation, pure and simple. Lorna, refusing to yield, leaned forward. Listen to me, Harlon. You have the resources to fix this. Hire the best lawyers, make a settlement. This doesn't have to ruin her. Or me. Grady's voice cut through the room, tight with disbelief. Or you. What is this article about, Lorna? You told me you were sick. You let me carry your lies like a badge of honor. They're exaggerating, she snapped, her eyes darting from him to me to the phone lighting up with fresh accusations. Don't listen to them. We're family, we can survive this together if we stand united. I let her words hang in the air, heavy and hollow. United, I repeated, leaning back in my chair. That's a curious word coming from the people who left me with $10 and told me I didn't belong. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tatum's breath came in shallow bursts. her eyes darting as if looking for an exit. Lorna's hands shook as she tried to silence the storm on her phone, but it was like trying to plug a dam with a single finger. Then came the begging. Tatum reached across the table, her voice rising. "Daddy, please, don't let them do this to me. You can make it stop." Her fingers brushed mine, and I pulled my hand back as if from a flame. "I didn't do this to you," I said quietly. "You did this to yourself." Lorna slammed her phone down on the table. "Enough of this performance. You want revenge, fine. But don't forget, we're your family. Without us, what are you?" I stood slowly straightening my jacket. My shadow stretched across the table in the flickering candlelight. "Without you," I said, my voice low but sharp, "I am everything you thought I couldn't be." Their panic filled the room like smoke, choking, frantic, uncontrollable. They weren't fighting for forgiveness, they were fighting for survival. And I wasn't their lifeline. I was the reminder that some debts can't be erased with crocodile tears. So let me ask you, if the very people who discarded you came crawling back only when their lies collapsed, would you reach out your hand? Or would you let them feel the weight of their own choices? I remained standing at the head of the table, letting the silence grind against their nerves. The roast had gone cold, untouched. The candles had melted low, their flames quivering like they too knew the evening was unraveling. Across from me, Tatum clutched her legal papers, her shoulders hunched as if they might shield her from the truth printed on every page. Beside her, Lorna sat rigid, jaw-tight, phone screen, still flashing with damning headlines. "You want to know what family means to me?" I said, my voice steady, measured. "It used to mean loyalty. It used to mean trust. But 2 years ago, you put a price tag on family. $10. That was my worth to you." Tatum shook her head, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It was a mistake, Dad. I didn't mean it like that." "Yes, you did," I said coldly. "And tonight I've learned something else. Your loyalty rises and falls with the balance in my bank account. When you thought I was broke, you cut me loose again. When you thought I was rich, suddenly I was worth $200,000. That's not family. That's opportunism." Lorna leaned forward, desperation sharpening her tone. "Stop this performance. You've made your point. But revenge doesn't erase the past. Help us, Harlon. You have the power to make this go away." I turned toward her slowly. "Revenge," I shook my head. "This isn't revenge. This is truth. And truth doesn't need my help, it stands on its own." Grady, who had been silent until now, finally spoke. His voice was low but firm. "Lorna, is it true? Did you fake all of it? The hospital visits, the donations?" Her lips parted, but no words came out. The silence was answer enough. He pushed back from the table, disgust clear in his eyes. I straightened my jacket and stepped toward the door. Tatum rose suddenly, her voice breaking. "Don't leave us like this, Dad. We can fix it. We can still be a family." I paused at the threshold, my hand resting on the frame. "2 years ago, you threw me out and told me I was nothing. Tonight, you finally learned the real value of your lies. You don't get to call me family when it's convenient. Not anymore." The weight of the moment pressed down on the room as I opened the door. Cold night air swept in, extinguishing one of the candles, as if sealing the evening's verdict. Behind me, I heard Lorna's frantic tapping on her phone, Tatum's quiet sobs, and Grady's heavy footsteps retreating from the mess he no longer wanted any part of. I didn't look back. Some endings don't deserve a second glance. And I ask you, if you had the chance to walk away from those who betrayed you, knowing they were finally crumbling under the truth, would you stay to watch, or would you close the door and never look back? 4 months later, I stood on a beach in Hawaii, the Pacific waves rolling in steady rhythm as the sun sank into a horizon painted gold and crimson. Warm sand pressed between my toes, so different from the cold motel carpet I once called home. The air smelled of salt and hibiscus, not disinfectant and despair. And for the first time in years, I breathed without the weight of betrayal pressing on my chest. The courts had spoken. Merritt called me that morning with final updates. Tatum received the maximum civil judgment, he said, his voice steady with professional satisfaction. $153,000 in restitution plus court costs. On top of that, felony fraud convictions, 3 years probation, community service, and a permanent criminal record. Any future employer will see her history in black and white. I thanked him, though the words didn't come easily. This wasn't triumph, it was justice. And justice rarely feels sweet. Lorna's collapse had been swifter. Jessica Chen's article had spread like wildfire, picked up by national outlets, shared across platforms. Overnight, she went from admired influencer to public disgrace. Instagram shut down her account. Donations dried up. And then came the IRS audit. Over $200,000 in unreported income. Penalties and back taxes stripped her of every asset. The glamorous life she had flaunted dissolved into a studio apartment and long hours at a commercial cleaning company. Grady filed for divorce in May, his reputation at risk if he stayed tethered to her lies. Even he who had once smirked from my couch as if he belonged there had finally walked away from the wreckage. As for me, my portfolio had only grown. Every house I flipped, every property I restored, was another reminder that my life was built on work, not deception. When I walked into a room now, I didn't see pity in people's eyes. I saw respect. And perhaps most importantly, I had found peace in people who valued honesty over convenience. Rebecca, an attorney I met during a Yellowstone trip, walked toward me on the beach that evening, her hair catching the breeze. She wasn't impressed by my money, and that was precisely why I valued her company. She saw the man, not the portfolio. "You seem lighter here," she said softly, slipping her hand into mine. I learned something I told her watching the waves erase footprints in the sand. Some people earn their place in your life. Others simply occupy space until you realize the truth. The ocean roared gently in response, as if agreeing. That $10 bill, the one meant to define my worth, still sat folded in my wallet. I carried it not as a wound, but as a reminder that the smallest betrayal can ignite the fiercest resolve. Tatum and Lorna had measured me by what they thought I didn't have. They never understood that true value isn't in wealth or status, it's in character. And I'll ask you, have you ever discovered that the very people who cast you aside were the ones who taught you the strength you carry today? When I look back, I realize the $10 bill wasn't an insult. It was a revelation. It showed me exactly how little my own family valued me. And in that moment of humiliation, I discovered the resolve to rebuild not only my fortune, but my life. The justice that followed through courts, through truth, through exposure wasn't about revenge. It was about accountability. My daughter and ex-wife learned that deception has a price, and no amount of tears or pleading could erase what they had done. But the real lesson isn't about wealth or punishment. It's about knowing your worth when others try to diminish it. Betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from those closest to you. Yet it can also be the fire that forges resilience. Family should mean loyalty, respect, and care, not manipulation and greed. If your family is treating you like a burden or only valuing you for what you can give them, I urge you to pause and reflect. Don't measure yourself by their lack of love. Measure yourself by the strength you find to rise above it. Now I want to ask you, have you ever lived through something similar where betrayal forced you to see the truth about people you loved? How did you handle it? And what did you learn from it? Share your story in the comments. If this story spoke to you, please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you for listening your time, and your voice mean more than you know.